Tonight we're going to be looking at an interesting passage. I say interesting because we don't tend to catch a potential connection. So we're going to start out with a potential connection. So if you would turn to Luke chapter 7. We're going to start at verse 36. That's Luke chapter 7, beginning with verse 36. Then one of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him. And he went to the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat. And behold, a woman in the city who was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus was at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil, and stood at his feet behind him, weeping, and she began to wash his feet with her tears, and wiped them with her hair, the hair of her head. And she kissed his feet and anointed them with fragrant oil. Now, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he spoke to himself, saying, "This man, if he were a prophet, would know who and what manner of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner." Jesus answered and said to him, "Simon, I have something to say to you." So he said, "Teacher, say it." And it goes on, but we know, one, Simon didn't have Jesus' feet washed when he entered. Notice who the name of this Pharisee is. Simon. Now, the text that we're on tonight really is John chapter 13. What was the event? A meal at Simon's house, Simon the Pharisee's invitation, and at this, Jesus' feet were not washed by Simon or one of his servants. Rather, it was a woman who came in who was a sinner who washes Jesus' feet. John 13. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And supper being ended, the devil having already put it in the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all the things into his hand, and that he had come from God and was going to God, arose from supper, laid aside his garments, took a towel, and girded himself. And after that he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So, is it definite that Simon the Pharisee is Judas Iscariot's father? No. Is it possible? I'd have to say yes. We don't usually hear the name of the Pharisee asking the question, the name of the Pharisee attempting to trick Jesus. This is the one time we hear who the Pharisee is by name. Yes.
Well, this is on the Pharisees actually had him in his house too, though.
Yes. This is a Pharisee who is willing to have him into his own house. Can we say it for certain? No. However, here's a thought. What was the life example Judas had? Now, before we jump all over Simon, because he did invite Jesus into his house for a meal, here's the other thought. So they've all gathered round and they're having a meal. None of the apostles or any additional disciples that may have been present thought to wash anyone else's feet. We take it for granted that, oh, look at this, the master is doing. It wasn't just what Jesus did. It was what nobody thought to do. In the case of Simon, as far as the Pharisee, that was sort of a, yes, come to my house to eat. And at the same time, I am going to make sure I maintain my standing because I'm not having your feet washed. So Simon the Pharisee didn't act as a genuine host. He should have had one of the servants of his house wash Jesus' feet. That would have been a common courtesy. Bringing that back to where we are in John 13, we need to also recognize the people we're talking about that are closest to Jesus, who've been with him for 3 years, don't have it all after 3 years. This common courtesy, none of them thought about taking the initiative on themselves relative to everyone else. And to use a more current-ish kind of thing, because we don't tend to do the washing of feet, fellowship meals. For a significant period of time while we were attending at University City, they had fellowship meals. What was it, every fourth Wednesday night initially? Something. Once a month they had a fellowship meal. And I looked around and realized initially, the only person cleaning up from the start wasn't even a member of University City. And I worked with her in working with little kids in the MOPS group. She came to help watch little kids, mothers of preschoolers, was what MOPS stood for. Her name was Miriam. She was a psychologist. I actually used her as a resource various times when dealing with issues with some of the kids. And I realized, wow, Marion's the only one helping clean up. Well, this isn't right. And I got up and I started doing the work. And long after Marion had left, I was still the only one doing the work. And one night, they didn't set up the tables right. And the middle table came crashing down. And all the food, when that one end collapsed, went just sliding off the end. And the guy who's wearing the apron, who's been taking all the emptied off food plates and moving them over to the kitchen so I could then scrub them, starts picking up everything off the floor. When I'm mopping up the floor, an elder comes over to me and said, I am so sorry that nobody bothered to help you.
And where was he?
The problem is, we can get so locked into our own cruise control, we don't think about the simple opportunities there are to be a blessing and a help to others. Any one of the disciples or even the apostles could have taken the initiative to wash the others' feet and Jesus as well. And nobody would have thought, well, maybe Judas might have. The rest of them, I don't think, would have thought worse of the one who had done the work. It was needed. And it was needed not so much in a have to have, but it makes it all a lot more comfortable when that creature comfort was taken care of in that society. I'll be the first to admit, it's a whole lot easier to have a fellowship meal that goes on before services when you know that it's not going to take 20 minutes to 30 minutes of people's time to do a cleanup because somebody has been taking care of everything all the way up until about 10 minutes before services. So at 10 minutes before services, saran wrap the ones that still have food in it The rest of them are already cleaned and are either half dried or whatever, so people didn't have to worry about who's going to clean up as we start services. Who could have done that kind of work? Anybody. Dorothy does cards. Who can do that kind of work? Anybody. How often are we taking the time to look around for the opportunity to be of service in the small ways that make everything go just that much better? Jesus wasn't putting them all down here. He is giving them a right example. But he has that opportunity for that right example, because even after 3 years, these guys aren't thinking yet about the idea, what does it mean to be Christ-like? They're still thinking, we're running around with this guy. He's the Son of God. We're not sure what that means, but we're still with him. Good for them. That's great. But there's still that common decency that anyone could have done that had not worked it into them yet. And the place I would point to is fruit of the Spirit. It's not sitting out there as when you finally get common courtesy, common caring, right here. Would have been awesome if any of the disciples or apostles had had the spiritual maturity to say, hey, if nobody's doing it, I can do it. Go ahead, Jim.
Someone needs to be humble enough to do the job.
Yeah.
It's a job, I mean, everyone running around with open face shoes on and everything else. It's a job that needs to be done.
Yep. And, okay, I appreciate that you chose the word humble, because at that time, we all know where they were walking. They were walking in public streets. Public streets were not like ours today, where it's cars and the fumes go up. Back then, it was public streets, and the waste went down into the street, and the fumes went up, and the squishy between your toes went up. You don't want to be sitting at a dining table with that 5 to 6 feet away from you. It's nasty. But none of them thought, one, was humble enough to do, but two, gave a thought about it on a simple level which involves nothing. And I don't know who does it here. I'm thankful for it. At Newberry, Sunday evening services, when they're over, Sierra and I take care of putting away the communion stuff. Anybody could do that. Sierra and I are the people that have been doing it for the past, who knows how many years on end. Now I can tell you what happened before we did that. The communion stuff would sit there till the following Sunday. And you would have white fuzz on the top of all the grape juice. And the fuzz would sometimes float around really neat like a disc. The bread would mold.
Someone's like, see, I've seen that.
Yeah. So, like I said, I don't know who does it here. Whoever does it here, thank you. Because, all right, thank you. That's one of those little things that the truth is, we'd all be grossed out if the lid gets opened up and there's something alive to greet you.
Even worse if you tried to hand it out to the members.
Yeah. So, while this passage tends to be, here's the great thing Jesus did, we need to also recognize it's the simple thing that Jesus did, that how technical was what he did? It wasn't. Anybody could have done it. anyone could have recognized the need if they were thinking about others when they came together. If when we come together, the only person we're thinking about is us, we're missing out on the John 13 opportunities. And okay, this isn't church, but it was interesting to see how many people caught on immediately. Recently, a coworker came in the office. She said something, and as soon as she finished saying whatever she said, 3 people immediately said, "Okay, what's wrong?" And she goes, "What do you mean, what's wrong? You just look like you were just run over by a Mack truck. You look dejected. You look really upset. What is wrong?" There have been so many times when I've seen people acting that way and nobody said anything. And no, I don't let that sit. I always ask, okay, you just look like something terrible has happened. What's going on? Anything I can do to help? When a stranger walks in, we don't have to know a person sometimes to realize, wow, they look like life has done them over. I know you don't know me, but I appreciate that you came here today. By the look on your face, life isn't treating you very nicely. Is everything okay? And if not, taking the time to ask shows we care.
Gotta be careful of that too.
I understand.
Something like by the looks of your face.
Right, I hear what you're saying. You don't want to tell somebody your face looks really dejected always. But
Yes, because I hate when someone says, "You look tired."
no,
Sure you're along.
right. Yeah, okay, it's something you got to be careful with. But the truth of the matter is, when it says they will know we are Christians by our love, part of that is what we're showing one another. And what wasn't shown here, common decency, simple act, that's an act of love. But the same is true for the people that come in the door, that when I greet them, if somebody looks as like, okay, you look like you're a bit concerned here, I'll say what I'm thinking about what I see on their face. Oh, I was just thinking blah, 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 blah. Oh, okay, well, that's cool. I took the time to ask to find out.
I usually, when I meet them at the doors, the doors for them, I usually, I don't know.
Yep. So the bigger takeaway for me out of this story wasn't so much Jesus did, it's what everybody else was so comfortable not doing. And as a church, we need to get good and uncomfortable with not doing and become people that consistently are looking for the opportunity to do. It doesn't mean one person has to do it all. I'm not saying, Jim, I want you to cover it all. Thank you very much for volunteering. You've been voluntold. I'm not saying that. I am saying looking for those opportunities are ways to be a blessing to everyone else. I appreciate that when I come in here on Sunday, there's stuff in the plates. I have been up front and been the guy in the center lifting off the lids and realizing over half were empty. And I don't mean half of a tray, I mean the top 4 out of 8 had nothing in them. And it's like, okay.
We were right back.
No, it was okay. You guys, here's one apiece. You, let's go. And we immediately went trucking with the empty trays, and we're pouring without the extra squirty bottles. We're just pouring as fast as we could, and we came in from the back because nobody bothered to check on the day that the person who normally takes care of it was out sick. because everybody took for granted, well, Jim never gets sick, and therefore we never have little fuzzies floating around in our cups.
Well, this happens occasionally, because I remember one day that I had to sing about 6 extra songs. I was hoarse before we had communion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Take up the time.
Okay, the Sunday when it was completely empty, I led extra songs. I was not the guy on the table. I was the guy that just stepped down, and they looked down at me, it's all empty. Like, okay, you go fill it. And I went up and I led a couple extra songs at that point. So yeah, there are things we take for granted. This situation, I'm pretty sure they took for granted, well, somebody was going to take care of it. Nobody did. When we recognize something isn't being taken care of, sitting back and thinking, well, somebody should have, isn't the right response. Because who qualifies as a somebody? Everybody. It's like the Jamaican song, everybody knows that anybody could do the important thing somebody should do. Everybody knows that anybody could do all the good things that nobody did. Ouch. Because everybody knows somebody could be doing this. Yes. Everybody is that potential somebody. And if we continue on, verse 5, after that he poured the water into a basin, began to wash the disciples' feet and wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. Then he came to Simon Peter. So it's not like Simon's the first guy up. Simon's been watching this go on, and he didn't run and grab a basin to help. He's watching the guy pick up all the dishes off the floor. Man, I wish somebody thought to help you out. So when it gets to Simon, Lord, are you washing my feet? Are you picking up my dishes? Jesus answered and said to him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this. Okay, what is the deep philosophical thing Peter's not getting? Yes, we have the whole idea of being washed. And in this respect, he is preparing them to be the ones who take up the mantle. Y'all are going to have to go forward. You're going to have to step it up big time. Because the stuff that I'm going to face, you're going to face the same kind of things. You're going to have to start acting responsible. So on one hand, oh yeah, this is sort of a pre-passing the torch. On another hand, no, this is wake up. You're not getting it right now because none of you, including you, Peter, thought to help when I started doing this. You let it go, and you let it go until it was your dish being picked up. And you stood there or sat there and watched all the other dishes get picked up until it was yours. And now you feel uncomfortable until it was your feet to be washed. And now you feel uncomfortable. Because he told him the truth. Right now you don't understand. Because, what's the word we would use? What was it?
Humble?
Possibly humble. Another one, immature.
Oh, yeah.
They were not yet mature enough to think about responsibility towards others. It was all about what they were to be taking in, what they were to be receiving, so that they could be the ones who followed after. And part of what should they have been taking in? The service he showed again and again and again. Go ahead.
I was just thinking, most people are selfish in their they think more about themselves than others.
Right.
And that's all what's going on right here. He didn't think about Jesus until it came to him. Like you said.
Yep.
And he was-
Right. And here's the cool part. What was the key part to being a servant this time around, besides being humble? Taking the initiative.
Observant in the first place.
Being observant in the first place. Like you said, and being humble. All those things are part of what it means to be a servant. Now, for the Jews, there's an extra kick. Because from Isaiah, there are two people. There is the Davidic king, the one who's supposed to come and conquer and put into place all that wrong that needs to be put in its place, to lift up the glory that is God. And then there is the suffering servant. Servant. What does that imply about this individual that was suffering? They were doing. They were serving. They were recognizing the need that was there throughout the book of Isaiah. And they were acting humbly, taking the initiative. Go ahead.
Selfless.
They were selfless. Now, who's our prime example for this? Jesus. What should we be becoming, too many B's there, if we're becoming Christ-like? The same kind of selfless that is observant and can recognize the fuzzies don't take care of themselves all on their own. Jim's out sick today. What does that mean about the cups? It means either somebody steps up and becomes secondary Jim, or come next Sunday, Sivan gets to be greeted by a whole lot of fuzzies when he gets to try to make it all up. We need to be becoming a people that's aware of each other enough to recognize the simple direct needs like what we have here, but also the more indirect needs that people don't always see. Take the time to think and ask, who does the miracle job? I know who the miracle job is at Newberry, and the funny thing is, I'm one of the people. Recognizing, thank you, and being aware that when the two of you are out, I at least need to, now I know it, I will do it, take care of making sure that if the two of you aren't here, that's all getting cleaned out to make sure nobody has to deal with the fuzzies. Because I'm thankful he does the setup on it on Sundays. And recognizing, if I don't see him here early on Sunday, I need to find out where the stuff is in the refrigerator and the freezer. Because I know at Keystone Heights, we had a problem one time. The regular person wasn't here. And they keep their stuff frozen. So the bread was in the freezer still to keep it as fresh as possible. It was, and these were individually wrapped cups. So the cups are all sitting in a freezer, and they did not take them out until, and there was debate, do we put them in the oven? They're like, no, there's plastic on those cups. What are you, crazy? They just wanted to keep it as fresh as possible. So there's the communion stuff sits in the upper left-hand corner of the freezer. Knowing what everybody's part is, even in minor ways, is one, respect. Taking the time to recognize these things don't happen on their own. Or as Vicki would talk to you about, was the university or our house, Things don't clean themselves up all on their own. And it's not the work mom's responsibility to clean up after the grad students who haven't grown up yet enough. As part of the body, as sort of silly as I'm taking it, now let's take it the opposite direction. How serious an act of love was this, considering the example shown at Simon's house? There's a reason I think this name is getting tossed about. It was there as a reminder. John is not the one who records what Luke recorded about it occurring at Simon's house. He leaves that name off there. But he's included it here. In one respect, I think Luke and John sort of did a very respectable thing. They didn't directly point the finger at somebody and say, you're nasty. But they did give the truth. Enough that if you want to put two and two together, how big an issue does this become when you think about the fact Judas's feet were also washed?
Then you got to concern yourself with if he truly was Simon's son, that this was not a setup from the beginning, where he asks Judas to go along with and become involved in following Jesus. That in effect, he would have an inside spy.
That's unfortunately a very strong potential. And we do see examples in Matthew and I want to say Mark, where it says specifically they were sending people in, and also in Acts, to spy on what they were doing. So yes, it's a definite possibility that if it is Simon, the father of Judas, that part of what Judas's problem was he could have been coerced a bit by his dad to start with. We don't need to make a story about this or a lesson about that because we can't. It's not necessarily provably there any more than saying that that was definitely Judas's dad's home that the first act takes place in. I say interesting coincidence, at least, that in both cases, the central issue was over the courtesy and respect shown through the simple act of washing feet. I will also put a cap on this one. Washing feet is not an act of worship. Sorry, as many places as have done that and have made it so that we have Sundays where we wash one another's feet, no, that's not what this was about.
It might humble you a lot and everything,
It might humble you a lot, especially if you get my gross piggies to deal with, but
but people walk around with closed shoes with socks on and everything else is nothing like what
yep,
people are walking around.
It was a cultural thing.
it was a cultural thing. We need to recognize that not everything in Scripture should be blown out of proportion to the point it becomes, oh, and the hidden lesson here is. No, I'm not going with the hidden lesson tonight. What I'm pointing out is interesting coincidence, but the common issue with both was common courtesy wasn't considered. And the word I will put alongside of humble is maturity. Because the truth is, it takes maturity to be rightly humble. Because Peter could have picked up immediately, well, Jesus is doing, I'm going to do it because I'm going to be just like him. It's like, whoa, 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 pal. This isn't a be like him moment. This is a taking care of things that should have been taken care of moment. We're all good with this one? Okay. We'll go ahead and pick up next. Oh, wait. We can get through it. All right. In verse 8, Peter says to him, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answers him, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean, and you're clean, but not all of you. For he knew who would betray him, therefore he said, you are not all clean. So when he had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, do you know what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet, for I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Servant. What was Jesus sent by the Father to do? To serve. How? Two different ways. One, in the way people could get it. Gesundheit. He served by meeting common needs. He fed people who were hungry. He healed people that had different diseases, demonic possession, who were blind, who were deaf, who could not speak. He also raised some from the dead. He provided the physical so they could understand when he mapped that exact same thing onto the spiritual. You'll make sure your belly gets filled. Are you making sure spiritually you're getting fed? If all you do is come for the meal and come for the entertainment, you're starving. Because what you got here, how long does one meal last? It lasts until my next meal, and I'm ready for the next by then. So one meal gets me by 4 hours. Big whoop. How long does something that digs into your brain a bit last as far as spiritual growth and development? Depends. Are you treating it like this? Or are you looking to make the application? Because people have taught this one many times. It didn't change the fact that for I don't know how many years, I was the one doing cleanup to the point that they had a homecoming. And all of a sudden, less than a week before homecoming, I get this panicked call. And it's like, what's the problem? Well, we blew it. So, what are you talking about? We've got nobody to head up cleanup for the homecoming meal. We just assumed you're the one that always does all the cleanup and everything for all these meals, that therefore you'd even be doing it for homecoming. We don't even know if you're going to be there. Because they weren't thinking servant. They were thinking, well, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. How's it all get done? How do the trays get filled? Who buys the stuff to make sure it's there so that come Sunday, he can assemble it? If we don't grow to become responsible like we expect parents to be, well, there's food on the table. Why? Because mom and dad worked to buy the food, to have a meal prepared, to get it served, and the kid just consumes. But we expect a kid to grow, to learn, to take care of those needs themselves, and potentially to become responsible for taking care of the need when others have that need and can't meet it themselves. This is a passage that hits the physical. But what's happening on the spiritual side? Are people learning to feed themselves? Are they learning, you know what? I'm lacking in this area. If I'm lacking in this area, I need to do something to make sure that spiritual need starts to get met. If I've got an anger issue, that's a spiritual issue. I need to go digging to find out what kind of things I could be doing to get in a righter frame of mind. Because we've got multiple hotheads in the Old Testament. We got Peter in the New Testament. One of the sons of, no, he's not one of the sons of thunder. That's James and John. James and John, sons of thunder. Lord, shall we call down fire from on high and just wipe them all out? Because they didn't accept your teaching with rejoicing. Oh, that would do real well with the Samaritans, who aren't Jews to begin with, whose message Jesus wasn't taking to them at that time anyways. Boy, are you guys missing it. Yeah.
They don't get the message.
No. Yes, they aren't getting the message yet.
They want to bring down thunder and everything on them for not getting the message, but they weren't even getting the message, so.
Right. So bringing it all together, a lot of what's taking place here, yes, it's Jesus preparing them to send them forth as the ones who will go out into the world. Part of what's being put forth here is at a really low, simple level of, hey, wake up, open your eyes to what's around you, recognize it doesn't automatically or automatically happen on its own. Somebody's doing something. Or, in this case, and in the case at Simon's place, nobody that should have been aware and doing was doing anything. And that sends a message as well.